we created 8 regional fishery councils to manage the living marine resources within that area. And on that marine council, there's the National Marine Fishery Service designator. There's the principal state official with marine fishery management responsibility for Maine, for New Hampshire, for Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. And then there are 12 members nominated by the governors of the New England coastal states with 3-year terms. And then there are 4 non-voting members, stakeholders. The Coast Guard, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the U.S. Department of State, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Now, Amendment 16 came from them. Council manages itself, supposedly. It manages the fiscal, the region. So I want to ask all of you, what's happening here? I mean, why? Is it the appointees? Are there too many diverse interests? It seems pretty, I think Congressman Keating asked about having a task force to do this. I mean, that is a task force. It's a statutory task force. It's a management effort. So what's wrong here? Why can't this democratic, local input, managed effort work? And if it can't work, what will work? Can I answer Well, you're the beginning part of it, but I think everybody's got to weigh in.
Thank you, Senator. First of all, I guess, and I stated this,
would you agree it's meant to be a pretty democratic process?
It is an extremely democratic process. To some extent, it's one of the reasons it takes us a long time to get things done because of the way the process has to work. As far as amendments...
Is it fair to say that sometimes the competing interests actually prevented things from getting done?
No.
Or slowed it down sufficiently?
They may have slowed it down. It's also the process and the things that we have to deal with through NEPA, with the APA, with Magnuson, with Marine Mammal Protection Act. There must be 6 or 7 or 8 statutes that we are required to adhere to. So that, that whole process is fairly slow.
Well, how do we make it work is the question everybody's asking.
Well, from my standpoint,
do some of those 8 guideline laws need to be changed? Does there need to be a more streamlined time frame for decision making? What are the inputs that could improve this?
Well, I think a more streamlined time frame would be good. I think most of that probably comes down issues taking a serious look at NEPA.
At NEPA, yes. Anybody else want to weigh in? I know Captain, you'd probably like to weigh in on that. Let me let our practitioner speak up.
Thank you. In my opinion, it took 10 months. From the time Amendment 16 was voted in, we had 10 months to get it up and running. It was not enough time to handle the issues that are very important to the fishermen, like allocation. Around the world, we go to a quota system. The battle lasts 3 to 5 years. We didn't have the, Amendment 17 after Amendment 16 was supposed to discuss allocation. It has not been done. It was just discussing permanent banks. The allocation issue is not on the table.
And is Washington away from that?
You want to know? I feel that there are undue influences that affected the council. Outside sources that really got some control, and there was a person from one of these groups that got up and spoke to the fact that they can influence the council. And
so in effect, what we really got to do is we got to look at the functionality of the council itself. Is that true?
Yes. That's why I like the idea of an independent.
Mr. Diodati?
Thank you. I agree that it is a very highly democratic regulation. I think it's also very sophisticated and elegant. And we have gone around many times over the years in trying to demonstrate the intent of the law. And there's always various opinions about what the intent is. But I think It really depends on how the legislation is applied. I think that the Secretary of Commerce and NOAA Fisheries has a tremendous amount of latitude in taking the plans that are developed by the council, but they approve, they implement them. There's another opportunity there to perfect what perhaps the council didn't get right the first time around, because it's not possible to do that in one or two boardrooms. It's not possible to decide a very difficult allocation procedure with stakeholders. But I think they have an opportunity to come back in. They do the Federal Register notice, but very, very often I don't see them taking advantage of.
So unlike Rick Perry, you think you ought to look to Washington to solve the problem?
I'm not suggesting Washington, but NOAA Fisheries and the Secretary of Commerce.
NOAA Fisheries, well, that's Washington coast.
Well,
Gentlemen, just quickly, we want to wrap.
I think, Senator, thank you. I think there's a multiplicity of problems, and so I would pick one and point out that I don't believe that the intent of Congress, as written literally in the Magnuson-Stevens Act, is being dealt with. And in particular, when you read the 10 national standards, it tells you to do a variety of things, but there's a focus on only one of them, which is overfishing. And one of the reasons that we're having so much problems is because we ignore, for example, National Standard 8, which is the economic and social fabric of the industry. How are we going to monitor the performance of fishery management if we don't take into account the social and economic aspects? I could go on and on, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, I understand that. We've wrestled with that for a long time. Look, we're kind of going around in a circle, which is what bothers me about this entire thing. We don't have adequate science. We can't do this on a 2- and 3-year basis. Senator Begich brought that up. But it takes resources to do it otherwise. And not a lot of people are adding resources where we're working these days. So this is a real struggle between common sense and day-to-day reality of people's lives. You know, if you want to take the socioeconomic, I mean, the fact is, we almost lost, as many of you know, we almost lost the striper 20 years ago. We had a 10-year ban on any fishing at all for stripers, correct? And it came back. And came back way beyond people's expectations. Now, you know, everybody understands the challenge of the overfishing. A lot of it's from these big fleets that come from elsewhere, not here. You know, it used to be they came up the coast from North Carolina and places. Mass numbers of very large boats and so forth. And so, if you're going to have an industry, you have to preserve the stocks. Correct? Please.
I'd like to respond, Senator. It is pretty clear that a very high priority is annual assessment of stocks. So what we have to do is not say we don't have the resources. What we have to do is examine the program and see whether we're applying our resources to the highest priority, which is annual assessment of stock. And it's not clear that that has been undertaken. It's
Well, I agree.
the next step.
I agree with that, and I think Senator Begich and I are going to, and Senator Brown, we will do everything in our power to move to that as fast as we conceivably can, because I think that could be a key that helps to unlock a number of things here. Let me just take a moment to welcome, we've got, I should have done this earlier, that our Gloucester Mayor, Karen Burke, is here. Scott Lang, the Bedford Mayor, is here. Former Mayor is also here. John Bullard, Angela Sanfilippo, Fisheries Watch, sitting over here. Roger Berkowitz, Legal Seafood, who hosted our last meeting here. We welcome all of you, and I'm sure there are other stakeholders here, but I did notice them, and they came in afterwards. I want to welcome all of them, and obviously hope they will attend this next meeting we're going to have also. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Senator. You know, it's since I've been working on this for a year and a half, we've had many meetings. I've hired somebody from the council who's gone around and been on the boats, met with the fishermen, and, you know, Senator Keating, Congressman Keating and Congressman Frank, you know, hit it right in the head. There's a complete lack of trust. There's a lack of answer. You can't even answer a simple question. And Doctor, you're one of the foremost experts in this area. You've already provided science, new science, to these agencies, and they've rejected it outright. Isn't that right?
Well, it's pretty complicated, something like that.
Well,
I want to be consistent with not providing it directly.
Well, based on the things that we've spoken about, I know that when we, in November, you, Mr. Cardin, and others provided Governor Patrick some information to Secretary Locke, evidence supporting increases in catch limits as well as fishery disaster declaration. The report showed approximately 19 million of fish not being caught as well as 21 million of direct economic losses, and you provided that to Secretary Locke, and he rejected it, correct?
That's correct.
And in addition, I have found just in my dealings with this agency that, you know, Dr. Luchenko, you know, her lack of attention to the questions, the failure to be honest and forthright with us has led to the devastation in the fishing industry in this state and making it harder, quite frankly, for fishermen like you to do your jobs. And when you hear, kind of, I call it the political kind of bougie-bougie up here, where they say one thing and do the complete opposite. Well, they say, well, we need to make the regulations are better. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Listen, the only thing that's coming at the end of the tunnel is a train that's going to shut down the industry. Because I've seen absolutely, has it gotten better? Yeah, a little better. But the overregulation, the continuous uncertainty and interference, the enforcement is still there. They've hired more enforcement folks, yet we have fewer votes. I don't know how do you justify that? But my saying that, I mean, one of my main questions is also with the increase, Mr. Walsh, the increased regulations and the regulatory burden. You indicated that if in fact certain things happen, you are not going to, you're going to be an armchair fisherman. Could you just describe to the committee, given the law enforcement abuses over the last 10 years, is there significant concern by you and others that you know about this increased compliance burden? And if so, what do you want us to try to do to help you?
There's a lot more regulatory paperwork and rules to follow on the catch shares. As far as compliance and enforcement, the problem, I believe, was not with the agents on the dock. I've never really had a problem with them. I'm a victim of the enforcement. I got shooken down by the lawyers at NOAA. They knew I wasn't going to hire a lawyer, and I had a really bad experience with them. And the blame shouldn't go to the enforcement agents. It should go to the lawyers that shook people down, the lawyers that are still working for them. Dale Jones, who shredded 70% of his documents, is still working for the government. That's insulting to the public. But now I forget the question, but...
How does the regulatory burden affecting you and others in the fleet?
The regulatory burden is just eliminating the small boat fleet. You're gonna, the game with catch shares, you have to have a lot of quota to make any amount of money. The majority of the fleet does not have a lot of quota.
And Dr. Rothschild, you know, I've been fascinated, you know, meeting you and understanding everything that you've been working on since you've been involved in this issue, not only your efforts with the scallops, but obviously you're providing the science and the information to NOAA and other agencies so they can make a better decision. In your opinion, is NOAA making fisheries policy based on science or something else?
I think the answer to that question is that the regulations are based on science, but it's not generally recognized how fuzzy the science is, and so that there is a high degree of latitude in interpreting the science.
So, I mean, I know that since we've spoken, what's the relationship that you've observed between Dr. Luchenko's office and folks working for NOAA. Has it been a cordial, has it been constructive, has it been antagonistic? Could you please describe to us your personal observations?
Well, I would just reiterate that the comments that many people have made, that the people in the street have a great distrust, a feeling for a lack of transparency. And that's one of the reasons why the Preston Pate report was so important, because it focused on that. I read the presentations that were made to the council in terms of the agency's response to the Pate report, and I would have hoped that there would be one response rather than three separate ones, and that the response would have focused with a time-phased action plan on each one of the recommendations in the Pate report. And I would also add that in addition to the kinds of things that are discussed in the Pate report, there are scientific issues which were raised in the governor's report, which could stand a joint examination, and of course the law enforcement. So there's a three-pronged issue. There's the law enforcement, which really don't have to go into, that's beaten to death. The science problem, which is very big, and the everyday management communication issues. And so there's really a lot to be done, and I am concerned that the agency itself can't do this by itself. It's not because anyone in the agency is bad or incompetent. It's just a huge task from within a bureaucracy to change the bureaucracy. And that's why I think that this task force or commission or external group could work together with NOAA and end up with a result that we all desire. Because if we don't do that, we'll be trapped in an endless morass of the bureaucratic operation.
Well, in closing, Mr. Welch and also Dr. Rothschild, it sounds like NOAA is well aware of how destructive, obviously, their policies have been. And we talked, as you said, we beat to death about the fining and also the lack of trust issues. Do you think it's time, Mr. Welch and Doctor, to turn the fisheries duties over to another agency, potentially, fisheries and wildlife, or some other agency?
Well, I'll turn it over to Mr. Welch, but there's always been talk of putting NOAA into Interior, and that's in common discussion in Washington for years. And so if...
Is it time, though? Is it time? I mean,
well, if they...
How much time are you going to use reestablishing that trust?
Right. Well, that's up... It seems to me that there's a good answer to that, which is it sort of depends on the response to this hearing, because there are things that can be done, and we have to learn what
Well,
they
is
are.
anything like the response to the last hearing? We're still waiting 5 minutes later. It's documentation started.
Yes, I think that's an excellent idea. You would gain the trust of the fishermen again. I mean, you know how hard it is for you to get an answer? Imagine when I went up there.
Thank you very much.
It's tough.
Go ahead, Mr. Dudley.
I just want to say to the point, Senator, there are many examples of excellent working relationships between members of our organization and the National Marine Fisheries Service. Our scientists do work very closely together on stock assessments and research projects and other things. But what happens when you come to a meeting like this today, and Dr. Lachenko suggested it's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts' responsibility to demonstrate the impacts that this federal program has had on our fisheries. I think that if Microsoft was telling their stakeholders, let us know what's wrong with our problem, with our products, and tell us how to fix it, they wouldn't be as successful as they are today.
Senator Begich.
Actually, Microsoft does do that. It's product improvement, that's what they do. They input from their customers, that's why they produce such an incredible product and control so much of the market. But let me go on to the broader issue. First, to the two professors. In your analysis here, Did you do extensive analysis of the Alaska experience? Because I will tell you, well, let me have your response first. Either one.
I'll draw on my experiences from the New England Scientific and Statistical Committee, as well as interactions with all regional scientific and statistical committees, including the Alaskan one. The current national standard guidelines were largely tailored to emulate what's happening in Alaska with the North Pacific Council, in which the Scientific and Statistical Committee is the peer review process for the annual stock assessments. They are integrated into that process much more so than in New England. There are many aspects to the Alaskan system that would carry over well here, in which there are annual catch limits that are set as defaults. They are modified by scientific information as it comes forward, and so what you have is a much more responsive system that we have. We're in the process in this region of retooling to come up with more frequent operational assessments, but that's slow coming, and until those are producing regular science, it's really the fishermen that are paying the price in the form of lower catch limits.
I have some experience in Alaska. I worked on king crab and salmon in Bristol Bay, and I was also at the University of Washington for a number of years. And the difference between the Alaska experience and the experience here on the East Coast is like day and night. There's a greatly increased trust. People work together in the North Pacific. It's really a system that works well, even though there are problems with the crab rationalization, things like that.
I would argue that was not always the case.
That's true.
I mean,
That's right.
I can tell you story after story where, we hated Seattle.
No, that's right.
We hated.
I was in Seattle
Japanese,
there,
fish. So I guess here's my point, and that is, I'm glad I'm here in one aspect of here, sort of in New England, but also I think there is a model or elements of a model that Alaska has that has worked successfully. I mean, that's why we now control over 50+% of the market of this country. There's sustainability. We're having other challenges now, not overfishing in some cases, in most cases actually. It is now because of climate change, acidification of the water. I mean, Senator Kerry can go along a lot on these issues, but I won't. But that's our challenge. But I guess I want to caution here, and I guess Mr. Cunningham, the North Pacific Fisheries Council that we operate under works well. It has some tough spots. I've been to those 3-day meetings, and the aspect of an issue that takes a year or two, or in some cases 8 years to resolve, because fishermen have such issues with what might happen without outcome, with a fear of what might happen. How much do you interact with other councils, and others, our council, in finding out best practices in order to succeed? In other words, at the end of the day, I'm a believer in the council process. Now, there are rough spots. Our council, for example, set up with the halibut issue a stakeholders group that works with us. What do you do to improve your system? Because it's clear, it's just my limited time here already, there is, between know there's some distrust, but also between the process, because no one would be recommending a task force if we weren't doing a good job on it. Since help me understand this.
Well, first of all, to your question about do we interact with the other councils, and in particular the North Pacific Council, the answer is yes, we do. We have 2 meetings a year with them, essentially all the councils getting together. If there are issues that we need help on, that are something that they've already done, we've gone to them. We had people come from that council for workshops before we instituted Amendment 16 and the whole process. So yes, we interact on an ongoing basis.
Do you use stakeholder groups at times to set up around certain species in order to get input and utilization of that in your decisions?
Yes, and in fact, we had it was over 60 meetings with stakeholders in the process of putting Amendment 16 together.
One question came up in our last time on the rollover issue. You said you're going to move that into your agenda somewhere.
That's correct.
When?
We have a priority setting for all the actions that we will work on in 2012 coming up in November.
Will this be, when you say whenever this site manager set an agenda, so is this like a December meeting, is it a quarterly meeting? When will you go after this issue? It seems like there's some strong interest here, and it seems like the agency wants to do this.
If it comes as a priority, set priority, we will start to work on it immediately after November.
Do you think it's a high priority?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And that's why we already have the provision.
Okay, but it's got to move forward with it, well, I understand.
No, we already have it, it's part of the local law, they get a 10% rollover. But we're looking at the possibility of increasing that under certain species.
Right.
Because, I mean, as was indicated, somewhere around 93% of all of the underages are concentrated in three stocks, and those are robust.
And has the commission taken a position on this before? My understanding you have, they rejected it, the increase in capacity.
The increase in the rollover, it has been discussed and we did not move forward.
So if you put it on the list, and it just goes on the list, but I guess here's my point, more directive. It seems like there is agency support, which for relative support something of this nature indicates they feel they're confident the science for certain parameters increase above 10%. That should give you a great opportunity to make this happen rather than have it on the agenda to discuss with no action that moves to a positive. Do you think you can move it to a positive? Do you feel confident you can move it to a positive outcome?
I feel confident that we can move ahead of this. I mean, I can't determine 18 different votes on that, and I can't sit here and say to you I can guarantee them. I guess it is something that will be discussed.
I'll pause there. I know the experience I've had with our council, and they're tough calls you have to make. And this issue seems so easy in a lot of ways. This 10% rollover issue, adding additional rollover based on certain criteria, that it would be such a positive to the fishermen to help as you move forward to this larger. Because I'm a believer, just so Mr. Welch represents us, we have had success around these quotas, around catch shares, hard numbers too. We have had great success in the fisheries that was being devastated by overfishing. I can tell you the halibut, we had 5,000 fishermen at one point. We consolidated 2,500. They used to fish 2 days for 24 hours. That's it. Now they fish for 10 and a half months. We get premium dollar, and it is sold around the world. So we have to deal with a third element, which is subsistence hunting. So we not only have recreational, we have commercial and subsistence. So we have a complicated process, more so than most communities. So I'm a believer in this, so I would just encourage you to make some, on this one, it seems.
Could I make just a quick follow-up comment? Looking at the projections for the second year of sector operations, there's going to be a much smaller percentage of leftover tax. Projections look like they're going to get a lot closer to them this year. But some of that has to do with the second year of this operation. People are getting used to a new system and understanding how to make it work better for them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions.